Hey, welcome to the March installment of my Q&A session. So what I'm going to do is answer 3 questions and do that once a month, and we'll kind of see how things go from there, because I know that Q&A type sessions are something that a lot of you enjoy, and is the kind of video I like to do. So let's get started. The first question comes from Scott Warmbier, who writes, thoughts on making the switch back through Windows from a Mac with thousands of digital photos, along with a fair amount of local iTunes content. Now, he says, when we switched from PC to Mac years ago, Apple made it fairly easy. That is true. I've always set up Windows machines as new, with very little being moved over from an older machine, and not for a Mac, or not from a Mac. If I relocate my iPhotos pics to some NAS storage, is there a compatible Windows app that will use the library format, or will I have to export everything? Great question. This is a two-parter. Let's talk about iPhoto. iPhoto in and of itself is a database. I am not aware of any application that would actually allow you to use that native iPhoto database on the Windows side of things. But there are certainly plenty of workarounds, one of them being exporting your photos and events into a file structure that Windows could then use. So that's one way of doing it. Another way, I don't know how active you are with iCloud, but you could always synchronize your photos using iCloud, then download them onto your PC from that as well. Now, the main thing you ask about as far as the organization, if you export out of iPhoto with the events, you'll have a sort of a folder hierarchy. Then you should be able to maintain that hierarchy with an application such as Adobe Bridge, which is absolutely free. You do have to get a Adobe Cloud subscription in order to take advantage of that, but that's kind of cool. Now, as far as the iTunes library, that's a lot simpler task. It's essentially moving that or copying that iTunes library, but you will have to rename it and add a .itl extension in order to use it on the Windows sides of things. So hopefully that answers your question. Yes, it's a lot easier, I think, to go from Mac or from Windows to Mac than the other way around, but it's not that hard, and I think it's going to be time and effort well spent. The next question comes from Mojo Dupree. How you doing, Mojo? Who writes, you know what makes me curious? If anyone recalls, Microsoft mentioned an open source Windows being possible someday. Also, remember how they said Windows 10 will be the last Windows? Well, Windows 10 support ends 2025 after the extended update. Since Windows 10 will be the last Windows, what will Microsoft do with Windows 10 at this point? Releases source code possibly. I'm 99.9% positive that will never happen, but who knows? They're going to do the same thing with Windows 10 that they did with Windows 8. They're not going to release the source code on this thing. It's a proprietary operating system to Microsoft. They have talked about open sourcing some components of Windows, but nothing that would be of any use to the average consumer out there. So that's just not going to happen. I believe the game plan, as it stands right now, is this is the last quote, where they have a version number of Microsoft Windows. So essentially, after Windows 10, it'll just become Windows. I think that's kind of the game plan. From the next major iteration of Windows, it'll just be known as Windows. It won't be a Windows 11 or 12 or whatever name they come up with, just be strictly Windows. So open source, no way. Ain't going to see that happening. They haven't open sourced any other prior versions of Windows. They're not going to open source Windows 10 either. Thanks for the question. Appreciate it. This question comes from Tyler Yacanero. Tyler Yacanero. I hope I probably screwed up your name, Tyler. Sorry about that. Simple question, he writes here. Here's an idea for video. Is AMD a dying company? Question mark. Well, the answer is a little bit more complicated than just are they dying. Let's put it this way. They have not fared well under their current business plans, okay? Now, back in the day, AMD was a real powerhouse, especially when they came out with the Athlon 64. That was the chip to get. A lot of people dumped Intel to get that 64-bit CPU. And that was the glory days for AMD. They got a lot of recognition on the street, but Intel quickly caught up and then surpassed them in performance. And, AMD has really kind of dropped the ball on, how they're doing things. They had their, the Phenom, which didn't go over too well. Then Fusion, which was their attempt to, marry the GPU and CPU together. The bulldozer architecture, again, not as power efficient as Intel, not as capable of processor as Intel. And now we have Zen. So what's going on right now is AMD is betting the farm literally on the Zen CPU line of CPUs. This is a redo of their entire CPU architecture. This is major. This is really, really huge. And AMD needs this thing to be a success. 40% more performance per clock, which is fantastic. It's going to be more power efficient. I think they're using the 14 nanometer die like Intel is using on this. They're also using simultaneous multi-threading on this CPU. So it should be a real strong competitor to the Intel lineup. Now the question is, would there be a compelling reason to switch from Intel to AMD? We're going to have to really see once these CPUs are released into the wild. And currently the timetable is, I think, at the end of this year when we'll see the first wave of Zen CPUs come out. Now, the other thing is, Intel, they have their Iris Pro graphics and so forth on their CPUs, but they're nowhere near as strong in that particular area as AMD is with their Radeon video technology in their chips. So this is, this is a good area for AMD to take advantage of. So if they have the power with Zen and they can keep amping up the GPU component of this with the Radeon graphics on there, they're going to have a real powerhouse CPU. Now, what happens if Zen doesn't go over well? Well, their stock prices might as well be trading as penny stock, really. I look for them to file Chapter 11 bankruptcy and reorganize. That means if you own stock in AMD, that stock will no longer have any value. It'll all belong to what's known as the debtors in possession and whoever offers financing at that point. It becomes really a brand new company. And it would probably be bought out by somebody like Foxconn, for example. The AMD brand, the ATI video cards, the AMD microprocessors, will continue to live on under new ownership and potentially a new direction. So I wouldn't worry about the AMD brand going away, but the current management team, that might very well disappear if Zen is not a commercial success. So hopefully that answers your question.